Atlantis, the proposed city in more detail. In episode 1, I showed this video where I used the bathymetric data to produce this 3D model. This was modelled using a voxel format, akin to something like Lego or Minecraft, where rectangular 3D pixels have been used to show the bathymetry. This would look fine if the data were available in a higher resolution, but it lacks a certain organic quality. I have since remodelled using a point-to-point method, then filled in the gaps with triangular polygons. The resolution remains the same, but I would say it looks more organic, being easier for the human brain to interpret. Here we have the new 3D model. So the same data, the same resolution, just modelled differently, with the rectangles replaced with the points and the gaps in between replaced with these triangular polygons. So the same resolution, the same data, just a more organic feel to it with the way it's been modelled. And then we can turn on the surface texture and leave the wireframe in place. And I think it looks more organic. I think the features are easier to pick out, and even the scan lines, which are an artifact of the bathymetric scanning process itself, are visible. So pulling down the rings that Plato described for the canals, I think it becomes clearer for the human eye to see where they slot in. And turning off the wireframe mesh, it still looks pretty good. The voxel format one didn't look quite so good with the wire mesh turned off. So a quick reminder before we look at the remodeled bathymetric data in more detail. Plato provides the measurements of the lost city with the unit of the stadion. So the singular form of the word is stadion in Greek, stadium in Latin, and stad or stade is the anglicised version, stadia being the plural of all three. One stadion is generally regarded as 600 feet, so that could be between 157.7 metres and all the way up to 209.2 metres, depending on the sources you look at for a stadion. The most commonly used unit I can find is 185 metres, or the Ptolemaic stadion. Some people have hypothesized that the origins for the stadion could actually be 1/2 of Earth's circumference, but this would be using the sexagesimal or 60-degree circle rather than the 360-degree circle. The polar and equatorial circumference of the world is slightly different, so this will give us two different answers for the stadion, but it would be between 185.2 and 185.5 meters if this hypothesis is correct. Again, if you remember from episode 1, using the measurement software built into the bathymetry website, I measured the diameter of the lost city at 4,996 meters, as you can see in the bottom left. If we divide 4,996 meters by 27 stadia, which is the diameter of the city that Plato describes, this gives us 185 meters. In reality, due to the low resolution of the bathymetric data, the tolerances on this will give us between 180.9 to 189.1 meters, but it basically ties up with both the Ptolemaic stadion and the sexagesimal stadion. One final reminder before we continue, quoting the Dialogue of Critias as written by Plato: "Breaking the ground, enclosed the hill in which she dwelt all round, making alternate zones of sea and land, larger and smaller, encircling one another. There were 2 of land and 3 of water, which he turned as with a lathe. Now the largest of the zones, into which a passage was cut from the sea, was 3 stadia in breadth, and the zone of land which came next of equal breadth, but the next 2 zones, the one of water, the other of land, were 2 stadia, and the one which surrounded the central island was a stadium only in width. The island in which the palace was situated had a diameter of 5 stadia. So if we combine Plato's proportions with the 185 meter stadion, we get something that looks like this. So a total diameter of 27 stadia, or 4,995 meters, and the blue rings represent the canals of water and the green rings represent the land. The first thing to note is at the top right of the model, or the northeast, is what I'm proposing to be the river that runs down from Randall Ridge, which should meet at a tangent to the Outer Canal, but it looks like it's possibly at some point brought down sediment which is blocking the east side and running over the city. And here's another view where you can see that. I showed this picture in a previous video showing the river coming down from the right hand side and eventually running out on the left hand side. Here's a 3D render to emphasize that point. So after I created the 3D model, I exported it to a lighting engine or rendering engine to make it look a bit more realistic. And you can see the build-up on the east side, which would have come down from what I'm proposing to be the river that comes down from Randall Ridge. And then in the next picture, I've put in the canals, or I've superimposed Plato's canals just because they're sitting level and it sort of emphasizes where the build-up is in the region. We've already established that the outer diameter of the outermost canal at 4,996 meters is almost identical to Plato's description. But what about the width of the canal? Plato describes it as being 3 stadia. So is there any evidence that the width of the canal here is the same in the model as Plato's description? We've already established that the east side is too blocked up to take any useful observations. The northwest is where I would say the water leaves the city, so it wouldn't be useful to take measurements there. It's the southwest part of the city where the canal appears to be the clearest. I mean, the low resolution is going to make it difficult to take an accurate measurement along with the buildup of sediment. But if we take the model derived from Plato's dimensions and zoom in, just looking by eye, the width is very similar. It would be useful to try and get some higher resolution bathymetric data, but from what I can tell, nobody has any higher resolution bathymetric data of the region. This does look to be very close to the 555 meters, but again, it's going to be difficult to get a very accurate reading on this, so only an observation by eye would be useful here. How about the width of the second canal? Is this close to the 2 stadia, or 370 meters, that Plato described? We already know the outer diameter is very close to the 15 stadia, as we measured 2,776 meters in episode 1, which brings it within a meter of Plato's description. I think the second canal is a bit more difficult. You can see it here, but the sediment build-up seems to be worse, and obviously the resolution is going to make it more difficult to measure the smaller canal. Let's just take a look with the model of Plato's rings. I mean, it kind of looks about right, but again, this is just looking by eye, and I just think there's too much build-up to get a conclusive measurement on this. It kind of looks right. Over here on the other side, again, it sort of kind of looks right, but I just think there's too much build-up to say anything conclusively. The innermost canal is said to be only a stadium in width, so 185 meters. I think we're going to struggle to see anything at all in the 3D model. The depression here is the only real indication of the innermost canal, but there's just too much sediment to see anything. I think even with higher resolution data we wouldn't see anything useful there. Let's just bring up the rings described by Plato anyway. Yeah, there's not a lot of useful information we can glean from this. I guess the only real useful thing is that Plato describes the centre part being a hill, the central island being a hill, and it does look to be elevated compared to other parts on the western cleared side of the site. There's one more interesting feature to the west on the outermost canal. Plato describes a 300-foot wide or 90-meter wide canal that heads from the outermost zone all the way to the sea, and I'm saying the sea is the Boré hole. If you watch the previous two episodes, the Boré hole is west of the city, and we'll find when we look at the model again in a moment, there is a notch which could potentially be the start of the canal leaving the outer zone and heading towards the sea. So the notch is to the west, precisely to the west, not due west. This is 270 degrees from where I'm calling the centre, and it could indicate where this 300-foot wide canal starts and heads towards the sea. Of course it would mostly by now be filled in with sediment, but it would head west approximately along this route here. I'm not sure how much more useful information we can get from the bathymetric model. Given the low resolution and build-up of sediment, there's not a lot more to be seen there. I would like to create my own model using this as a reference, just building in the descriptions that Plato described, so as it might have looked back in the day, but this will likely be a couple of months from now. I will show one more video of where it might be useful to send ROVs. I think most of the city itself would just be covered in sediment, so without some sort of pioneering underwater excavation technology, how much you would see there today with a submarine or ROV, I'm not sure. So we've already spoken about the sediment build-up, particularly to the east where the river comes down from Randall Ridge. Also, there's just generally sediment all over the central part of the site. I think because the notch stands out so well, it would be useful to send ROVs there to see if there's any evidence of the canal that heads towards the sea. Also, there's cliffs to the northeast of the city. The very peak of the cliff is about 150 meters above the city, and it stands above the height of the river that feeds the city canals, so it might have avoided any landslides or subsidence, so there could be something to be seen up there if there was a lookout point that looked over the city, for example. This is where I'm going to stop with episode 3. It's taken me a little longer to get episode 3 out than I would have liked. This was mainly due to remodeling the bathymetric data. Part of that was down to me, part of that was down to my 6-year-old laptop, which was struggling with both the modelling and the rendering. Episode 4 hopefully won't take so long, maybe a week or two from now, and I'll continue with the Atlantis and the Azores theme, and I'll probably bring together some papers to explain what the climate might have been like 12,000 years ago, and we'll see if we can put any geological evidence together to see if this place really could have been above water.